Hey, Paul, man, I wanted to call you and wish you happy birthday.
Oh, hey man, thank you. How's
Yeah,
uh
it's,
how's it going?
how are you? That's what's important.
Dude, it's been good. I would really love to record a podcast today though.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you what you wanted for your birthday. Is that what you want?
Yeah, that's what I want.
I like it. I like it. I'm spending more money.
Sweet.
All right. Well, I guess it's up to you then. What do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about Genesis
All of it or what? Like, be
3.
specific. Genesis 3?
Genesis 3.
Are you sure we're ready for that?
No one's ready for that.
Let's do it. This is a new world, man.
All right.
I don't even know what to do with this.
We're trying Let's just go for it here. We're doing
Yeah.
something different. We're doing something different.
We're in the season.
It's a brave new world.
Brave new world.
Just
All
without
right.
the weird stuff.
I'm going to start with a shot of tequila, my reposado.
Sweet.
What are
I'm
you
gonna start
starting with?
My Espelon.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh.
we're doing new technology. We're technological now. Technological. It's crazy.
I mean, I don't like it, but it's what we got to do, right?
It's true. It's true. And we're working through it. We're working through it.
I don't want to say I don't like it. It's just not as good as being in person.
It's different, but at least we can still cheers.
Yeah. So, shot number
Here we
one.
go.
Here
Shot
we go.
Cheers.
All right. Hey, also, I don't like drinking alone. This is weird.
Is this technically drinking alone?
It's kind of sad. I think I'm drinking alone.
Well, as I tweeted once, the difference between the difference between drinking at 5 p.m. and in the morning is bravery. Doesn't apply right now.
But I'm brave. Thanks for
But you're
that.
brave. You're
Yeah.
brave.
I left the door
People are
unlocked.
afraid to do things alone, you know?
Yeah. If anybody wants to join me, my door is open. Just come on in, you know?
It's true. He won't even question it.
Won't even question it. I'll pour you a drink.
Just bring a 6-pack.
That's the best commercial on the radio right now. I think it's Heineken. They're like, let chilling by the pool be your workout this summer. And let Heineken be your 6-pack.
I can
Hey,
get,
I'm
that's actually a great one.
I'm like, yeah, I wasn't gonna work out anyways. Might as well have a 6-pack anyways.
You know, I'm starting to work out. I'm getting into that a little bit.
I've actually been working out since I moved too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's been convenient. There's a gym in my place, so
Oh, that's cool.
just go down a couple floors and rep it out.
I've got a gym buddy now. A couple of gym buddies, so that helps. Not like I'm a huge gym rat. Like I walk in, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? That's me when I first walked in. They're like, yes, welcome, sir. I'm like, cool. What happens here?
what do people do here?
Now what?
Yeah, what is
I
this
was
place
like,
for?
oh, there's a treadmill. I recognize that thing. I guess I walk on it fast.
No, yeah, I walk in. I don't have a plan. I do it until I'm like tired, and then I leave. So
You know what? I've been getting into the row machine a lot though. I understand the hype around it.
oh yeah, tone that back up.
Dude, it's good stuff.
All right, so I'm pouring some rum now.
Ooh. I'm mixing it up. This is a new one for us. This is I think it's the Fernet Brancamenta. Which is like this might be the wrong one. Maybe there's another one that like you're supposed to do shots of, but it's honestly just like it's a mint liqueur. But it tastes good. It's got like tons of herbs and stuff in it. It's like, I can get down with that.
I mean, traditionally liqueurs are not for shooting, but
True. Most of the things we do aren't for shooting, but
yeah,
here we are.
we're a little avant-garde. We experiment.
True. Yeah.
Paving a new way. That's what we're doing.
That's what we're here for.
All right, shot
Hey,
number 2.
cheers to you.
And cheers, mate.
It never gets old.
I'm enjoying this a lot. Sweet like butter. You know what's sad is we can't like taste the same thing. I mean, if I had
We're
enough
gonna work
money,
on
we
that.
could buy, we'll get there. But it's like one of the funnest things at the beginning of the show is like, well, this tastes like this. I don't taste that at all.
Yeah, but I wish you were here to try this one.
I
There's
wish I was
definitely
too. It
mint,
looks really cool.
but I think there's a hint of vanilla in it as well.
I'll tell you what, the rum, per usual. I mean, this is a 10 out of 10.
I love rum.
It's so vanilla.
It's so
vanilla
good.
AF.
Oh. You know what's weird? And I don't know if you're feeling it too. I feel like we haven't really started yet. Even, you know what I mean? It's like, I know we're 2 shots in and we're going, but there's something about having to do this through technology.
It's almost like
cloud, man.
we're actually catching up with each other.
I know, that's what it feels like.
Like this is a real like, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while.
Like I don't. In my head, people aren't gonna go and like watch this.
Like this is a private FaceTime call.
Right. We've got a bunch of peeping toms. But hey,
we have our business.
I brought one of my old favorites back. We got the old Seven Bros.
Seven Brothers, hometown brew. Yeah.
Dude, I'm almost out. I need someone to help me out here.
Hey, Ohio people, buy 2 bottles. Send one to Atlanta, the other to Lakeland.
Yes.
There's a Atlanta distillery. I think it's called Atlanta Distillery. What are the initials? I don't know. They've got a pretty good bourbon I want to send to you.
Oh,
nice.
sweet.
We both had a bottle of that. Yeah.
That'd be awesome. I know. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm going to be going to. I'm going to be going to. It will happen this year. I don't know when, but to Ohio, and I need to get some beers there that I want you to try as well. We need to.
Oh yeah, get some local brews. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, there's some good stuff there we need to try.
All right, so I'm shooting this Contreau.
Right on. I got the
orange liqueur. You know,
Seven Brothers.
I'm not supposed to be shooting it, but
wait,
here we are.
Oh, we should have lined our liqueurs up.
Well, I was just doing the clear one last.
Oh, that's true.
And
this is the clear
spirit.
one for me.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
Holy
that's
Spirit.
the spirit right there. All right.
Hey, cheers.
Yeah, cheers, mate. That tastes like oranges.
Annie did that one with us too.
Cheers, Annie.
Cheers. Well, hey.
That's interesting.
That's good.
I have one more story I want to tell before we crack our
please,
beers open.
please.
So, you know how, I mean, you already know it, but I want to share it with our listeners. That's weird that I have to give that disclaimer. It's like, what does Paul know? What's for Paul? What's for the listener, right?
Yeah.
This one's for the listeners. No, I just thought it was really funny that, last night I'm going to a picnic to meet my new incoming seminary acquaintances and some of the faculty. And I text our group chat in Lakeland.
Yeah.
A bunch of them went to Southeastern, which is a very dry campus, very anti-alcohol. Probably shouldn't have said the college name. That's okay.
We can bleep it.
It's in my Wikipedia page. They know where I went for undergrad.
You have a Wikipedia page? Dude,
Not yet. It'll be there.
Before this episode airs.
No, anyways, I texted the group chat and I was like, I really hope my seminary picnic has beer.
Yeah.
Kind of tongue in cheek. I was joking.
Because you think they probably won't.
They probably won't, even if they're pro alcohol. It's like, that's like, you don't expect that. I walk up and the first thing they do is like, hey, you want a beer? And I was like, yes, of course I do.
Dude, that's so good.
And it's so funny.
Honestly, it's like you made the right choice. That's all you know.
I could feel it in my spirit. My spirit and my heart and my mind all aligned at once. And they're like, you are in God's will.
Like, God affirmed this.
And you know what else is funny is like nobody else there came from a denomination that put a religious trauma against alcohol in them.
Really?
Whereas me, all the churches I've been a part of and then in my school were anti-alcohol.
Yeah.
Even though I'm pretty pro. I was the only one that walked up and was like, yeah, I'll have a beer. Everybody else was just waiting, And I was like, yeah,
That's
give me one.
There's I don't want to offend anyone. You're like, I will. Beer me.
It was me and one of the deans were the only ones that started off drinking. Everybody else followed later. I was like, This is how it should be.
Oh yeah.
This is on like
You leading and everyone following.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
So
That's
with
pretty
that,
great.
let's crack these sour monkeys open. Have you
Dude,
had this beer before?
I haven't. Okay, so I did have it yesterday because I have a bunch of them. I was like, I want to try it a
Yeah.
little bit, and I wanted to. So I've been doing this thing where I don't buy water anymore
Just
because
beer.
I get all my free water from Planet Fitness. And it doesn't work, but in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm getting a free membership because I fill my
Because of all the
water
water.
bottle up there. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But it doesn't work, and I'm thirsty most of the time. But so I was like, I need something to drink, and I had this. So I drank this, and I'm gonna tell you my thoughts after we try it again here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. First, I want to point out 9.5% alcohol here.
I did not see that before.
I've had.
I was distracted by the monkey's tongue because I love this.
There's been a few times where I've had 2 of these, and I had a really, really nice night.
There's been other times you had 3 of these.
And
It was an even better night.
I don't remember it, but I remember it. I think it was good. All right.
Dude, cheers to you.
Cheers.
I need to send you one of these mugs.
Yeah, I'm drinking out of a water glass, by the way.
Oh, I'm gonna get you one of these.
I had a beer mug, and I busted it pulling out of my dishwasher. Yeah, it was sad.
You gotta hand wash that stuff.
Yeah, I learned my lesson.
It's okay. We all learned something. That's fun.
Right.
Hey, dude, cheers to you.
Cheers, mate. Clink.
Clink.
That made me so sad. That made me very depressed.
Don't worry. We will clink in person together someday.
Can't wait for the day we clink in person.
So what I think is interesting about this beer is, so personally, I'm not like, I don't love sours as much as you do.
Yeah.
But I can appreciate them. But this one tastes completely different than any sour I've ever had. It tastes kind of like a sour candy, like one of those. What's the candy with the guy who's like? You know what I mean? Sourhead.
Yeah. It's Sourhead.
Warhead.
Yeah, Warhead.
Thanks, Annie.
Sourhead.
Sourhead. Makes sense. It tastes kind of like a Warhead.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of unique and interesting about it.
It's pretty. I don't know if it's the liquor I had before this, but it's pretty weedy. More weedy than I remember. This is one of the first sours I had, though. So compared to other sours, it's not that sour.
No, it's like a very kind of like mellow sour to it.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's a triple, so it's a German brew. It's definitely got that distinct German flavor.
It's pretty cool. Can't go wrong.
Anyways, I've taken 2 sips and I feel great.
Now imagine having another one. One. So I had to.
If you're ready to get into this, I'm ready to get into it.
Dude, I'm ready. I'm gonna let you. I know you were really excited about this last time. I'm also very excited about this.
Good.
I'm gonna let you take control here a little bit and let us lead it.
All right. So here, we'll see how it goes. Okay. I think I want to read the whole, not at once. I want to read the whole text of Genesis 3. It's about, I think it's 24 verses.
Okay. It's pretty short.
And it's in my mind, it's 3 parts. And so I want to read the first part and see what we want to talk about there. I know we want to talk about the serpent. I think that's what's going to make up the majority of this part. So
yeah.
Also, because I don't have an NRSV Bible, like a physical copy, and I don't like any of the other translations I have, I brought out my King James.
No way.
Yeah. And honestly, I prefer, there's certain books in the Bible where I'm like, you got to read that in King James, like the original word,
The one thing I do appreciate about the King James is vocabulary was, I'm going to say, different then. And so a lot of the words they use, we wouldn't necessarily think of those words today in the same way, but they add like a rich meaning to it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's just poetic. So the poetic books I want to read in the King James. So
Genesis. I see what you did there.
Genesis.
I see what you did there.
Job, the Psalms. Typically, I stay away from the New Testament with the King James. Maybe the Sermon on the Mount is good for the King James. But here, I'm I'm sneaky. I know I am. I know
a little crafty.
Like a serpent,
pun
you know?
There. Pun intended there. You know what's funny? I'll say really quick before we jump into it, because we're talking about the fall, and everyone knows the fall, the fruit. People refer to it as an apple. And so I thought it would be, I played with the idea a little bit of having like an actual apple I was eating here the entire time. But instead I have dried apple fruit.
You know, to me, I prefer to,
I just thought it was funny.
Maybe this might be too dirty for the podcast, but I prefer to think of the fruit as like a peach.
Because you're from Georgia.
No, not because I'm from Georgia. Like in the same way, like
I like to think of it as like a Buckeye.
like think of it this way. No, that's not why. I'm thinking in terms of like how we use the peach emoji. I'm sorry. If Annie doesn't like that, she can cut that out. I'm gonna read Genesis.
You know she won't though. So, but let's read the Bible.
Sorry for that. I apologize.
Don't be sorry. That's funny.
In my most sincere. All right, so I'm gonna read verses 1 through 13, and then let's just talk about it. All right, I'm gonna do it in the best like King James voice I can.
Read it like Shakespeare.
Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Ye hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. That was only 5 verses, but it felt like a lot.
There's a lot.
So maybe we stop there.
Okay.
Maybe we discuss that for a little bit. How do you feel about that?
That sounds good. There's a ton. Well, if it were me, we'd be in Genesis 1:4 right now.
We'd be in Genesis. Yeah. It took me a second to process that, but yeah, yours is more accurate. We'd still be in Genesis 1:4.
Yeah,
let's talk about the serpent.
So,
let's just talk about the serpent.
Pull that apart a little bit.
Well, so typically, in our Christian understanding and in our context, I think when we hear the serpent, we immediately associate the serpent with Satan. You agree?
Yeah.
And that was not originally how the early Christians and early Jews would interpret that. Mm-hmm. What's weird, what I don't seem to understand is the Jewish people started to associate the serpent with Satan before the time of Christ. So it's weird to me that there was also a time period where the Christians didn't associate it with Satan, you know? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until, it was like somewhere between 300 and 200 years before Christ that Jewish scholars would associate the serpent with Satan. And then it was not until like 300 years after Christ that Christians would do it. So originally, the serpent was seen as this mythological symbol for a lot of things. For being wise, he represented wisdom. He represented kind of like a chaos, but not in the sense where it was always an evil chaos, right? It was kind of just like this dynamic creature, this unknown creature, right? Because they're crafty. That's another thing. Is that the word they use for?
They use crafty is in my ESV version, and I think that's what most versions use. But yours used a different one.
The King James used subtle. I wasn't expecting that.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's crafty and what's the other more prominent term?
For sneaky?
Not sneaky. It starts with an S. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
Thesaurus.com. Yeah.
But so here's the thing: is the serpent I think what's important here is the serpent didn't necessarily represent evil. If anything, the serpent kind of represented the same thing as the tree of knowledge of good and evil represented. It was kind of this both. The serpent was this ambivalent creature, both good and evil, right? Doer of good and a doer of evil.
That's interesting. Yeah. So unpack that a little bit for me. A little, even more.
I wouldn't even. I don't even know where to start with that.
That's fair. Well, go for it.
I just think it's one. I think it's important to note that the serpent hasn't always been tied to Satan, so we shouldn't be so quick to associate with Satan, and we shouldn't be quick to associate the serpent with a symbol of evil. I think ambivalence is more right. It's the serpent, just like the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If we're more accurate to the Hebrew text, it's not even. It doesn't really say knowledge of good and evil. It's a merism, so it's the tree of just knowledge, and what is consumed and incorporated in that knowledge. Well, on one extreme we have good, and the other extreme we have evil, but it's also everything in between. So it's basically consciousness itself. It's just consciously aware that there's things that are better than others, that there's values, there's hierarchies, right?
Yeah. So there's a level in that I disagree. I guess I not say disagree. I do disagree a little bit.
I mean, if
I'd say like another side of that. I guess I think about it completely differently. But I want to, before we get to that, I want to back up a little bit, just because to kind of add to your point, the idea of the serpent. So the word there is it ha-nakash? I know that the main root there is nakash. So which actually means several things. So the one that most people would know, which is the serpent, that's what we see. The other one is the shining one, or the brazen one, or the brassy, this idea of luminescence.
Okay.
And I think that's what's interesting about it too. When we look at that, it's like they're not. It seems to say they're not referring to this idea of we have a literal snake. We have this literal member of the animal kingdom slithering around and talking to everybody. It's like, that's a little weird. But instead we have a being of in a sense, we'd say a being of light, a luminescent, shining being. And we see that actually in other parts of scripture where it's that same word is translated differently. Which I think is, I don't have those in front of me right now to pull that up. But I think that's what's interesting about it when we look at it. It's like, so when Adam and Eve, they're in the Garden of Eden, they have a regular communion with these beings, with God. God walks in the garden with them up until this point. So it's like we see that they would recognize this being and be like, oh, cool. It's just another one of God's divine creatures. That's kind of that's like a really 10,000 foot pole version of the view of that. But I guess for me, it's like when we look at this, like they look at this and say, like, oh, cool. Here is, for lack of a better term, here is an angel. Here's a divine being. And so what's interesting about that, why I bring that up, is because the word we don't see there is the Satan. We don't see ha-Satan.
Yeah.
Which we see in other parts of Scripture. And
I think
I think what's important about that is there's a distinction between I heard it put this way, who God puts on his payroll and who God doesn't. So it's like there seems to be, I might be leaping a tiny bit, but there seems to be like a distinction there between the Satan, which we talked about in Job, a job description, a title of this is what you do. This is God gave you this job like he did for angels. An angel is a messenger. That's your job. But we don't see that description here when it refers to the serpent. It's like that word Satan is completely vacant of this entire narrative in this section.
Yeah.
So
sounds like we're agreeing. Sounds like we're agreeing that it's a more recent phenomenon, if we can consider like 300 BC recent, right?
Yeah.
To associate the serpent with Satan, right?
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think that's kind of like a newer idea there. And a
Newer
lot of that is
in the
because
past 2,000 years. Yeah.
we like to make things really simple, and it's really easy to think there's one rebel and then we're good. But it's like, no, there's a lot more going on. It's a very complex situation, reality that we live in.
Yeah. Okay.
Love how I
So
stuck in the word reality there.
I remember the okay. So there's two words
Mhm.
in the English. That's one word in the Hebrew. So oftentimes the serpent is said to be crafty,
Yeah.
which kind of connotates evil intention, right?
Hmm.
But that same word translated in other places, like Proverbs especially, and I want to get to that. I want to get to this story in Proverbs and just the entire Old Testament, what the general theme of all three of those things are.
Hmm.
But in Proverbs, that same word is shrewd, which doesn't have an evil connotation, just a wise, smart.
Yeah. If we say like he's a shrewd person, we'd say, oh, he's
Yeah,
very clever.
yeah. Like I would say, you're a shrewd person.
Thank you. And you're a very crafty person. No, I'm kidding.
Whoa. I've got the order shirt on today. You got the chaos shirt.
I got the chaos shirt.
All right, so tell me why you disagree with me.
Yeah, so I think, I would say, I think, because I argue at least the action of eating the fruit differently, in the sense of it wasn't necessarily like an understanding good and evil as I know this and I know that, but it was more of a experiential learning of that thing. So to that point, they haven't experienced sin. They haven't experienced, I use the word sin. They haven't experienced this idea, but they may or may not. I'll say that because we don't know. But like it was outside of an idea of knowing what evil was, what something apart from God was.
All right, so let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. Are you saying that what we're supposed to receive from the story is that Adam and Eve had consciousness of good, but not of evil things?
So I guess what I'm saying is, to this point they haven't experienced anything apart from God.
They haven't, yeah. So
they haven't experienced
anything other than goodness,
doing
right?
something that was against what God said. Does that make more sense, or is that more confusing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if we take goodness to its absolute form, which would be the nature of God,
yeah,
that makes sense. They've only experienced God up to this point. Mm-hmm. They haven't experienced, the privation of good.
Yeah, they haven't experienced doing something apart from Him. If that makes sense. Him being God.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a valid way of looking at it, but I don't think it's the right way. Just because of the language used around the tree. Because I think we have this bias, especially nowadays, when we come to this story in Genesis 3, where we hear of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Mm-hmm. And it's such a bad thing that Adam and Eve ate this fruit, because now they're self-aware, they're conscious. And we only put emphasis, like 100%, not 99%, 100% of the emphasis is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil brought about the knowledge of evil. Yeah. What about the other half? What about the knowledge of good? So I would argue that they didn't have knowledge of good, even though they experienced. I can't disagree that they experienced it, because they were in Eden. They were in the most perfect place created by God, right?
Yeah.
Everything was fully nourished. So maybe they experienced it, but they didn't have the knowledge of it. Maybe that's a confusing way to phrase that. But I think what we get from this text is not just the knowledge of the evil that we are prone to do, but also the good that we're drawn to.
That's interesting, and I think it's interesting because I don't really put emphasis, me personally, on, I guess, the name of it. I kind of look at I think for me, I focus, and that kind of how I interpret it is based on the action that was done, like what happened. And so, well, I'll read this. This is saying it way better than I was trying to say it. I was like, I'll just look at my notes and read what I have here. So this is from I think I've quoted him in the past, Mike Winger. I think you might have seen some of his stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the way he explained it, which was eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is a really long title, wasn't just knowledge in general. Wasn't just knowledge in general. It was about the experiential knowledge of having done wrong, and now being thrust into that world of temptation and moral autonomy, making decisions apart from the will of God. That is, of course, a bad thing, is how he says it. It was done in rebellion to God. God uses it for good and uses it. Yeah, use it for good and uses it for good, but it was not a good thing. So that's kind of, that's a good summation of kind of my thoughts around this, where it's like, regardless of the name of the tree, it's like I not that it should be neglected, but I think what I look at is, what did they do? They made a decision apart from the will of God. God said, don't do this. And they chose to do that in rebellion to him.
Sure. And one thing I will agree with what you quoted from Mike Winger is the problem with the story is the autonomy. And it's not the fact that they have autonomy. There's nothing wrong with having autonomy. I think to a certain extent, me being somebody that believes in free will to a nuanced extent, wouldn't go full Arminian on you, but it's how they use their autonomy to expedite the process. And I know this is a point we disagree on, because we brought it up at the end of the first Genesis episode, is I do think that God's intent was to mature Adam and Eve in this growth process in the knowledge of good and evil. I think it was God's intention to lead them into a fullness of consciousness, a fullness and awareness of their being. I don't think God intended for them to spend their entirety not knowing they were naked. Because the only people that don't realize they're naked are children.
True. having a 3-year-old run around in that my cousin's 3-year-old, he doesn't care. that understanding of what does that mean doesn't exist for him. But it's interesting. So I want to ask you, what do you mean when you say not like a full knowledge of? With full knowledge. Like what is that? What do you mean by that? Because I think that's where our definitions kind of change a little bit, or maybe disagree.
I don't think God intended for us, and we especially see this today, where we see the scriptures used, and we kind of, it's funny how much overlap I'm seeing between this conversation and what we talked about in the Job episode.
Dude, writing my notes for this, I was like, there's so much overlap.
There's a lot of overlap
so
going on
good.
Here. But I don't think God intended us to be naive that evil exists. I don't think God intended for us to be naive of anything, honestly. I think God wanted to lead us in this fullness of knowledge. So I don't think we can have I don't think we haven't reached our full humanity until we understand the depths of the human experience. And that involves both the good and the bad. Okay,
so I think I agree with the contingency. In the sense of, I agree. I think that I mean, it's the same for God. God, I was talking to someone, I used this example. I was like, it's kind of like God himself understands evil, not experientially, but he knows what it is because it's not him. If you believe in God is absolutely good. In the same sense as, like, if I organize my closet in a certain way and someone else walks in and changes it, I can walk in and be like, whoa, someone messed with my closet, because this is not the way I intended it to be. This wasn't my will for my closet, if you will. It's a poor example, but it's one. So that's kind of what I think is like, God himself understands what isn't him, in the sense of he knows what it is, but he doesn't experientially know it. And I think that's where the difference that I have with it, when I look at the tree and like in eating the fruit is like knowing what it is. I think that was a part of being conscious, is knowing who God is and knowing what isn't God. But we don't need to know that experientially. And I think that's where I would say it was a morally wrong thing entirely. God never intended us to experientially know autonomy apart from him, or to know wrong. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I'm at with it.
That's interesting. I wouldn't even go as far as to say I disagree with you there. I think we're really getting into semantics here with the understanding of what knowledge is.
It's true.
But I think
unfortunately, I haven't done all of my homework to bring in the language behind it or anything. It's a huge philosophical argument, more so.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It kind of has devolved into philosophy here.
Yeah.
But I think I want to take the hard stance that by knowledge, it means all knowledge, which would include the experience. Yeah. And I think I'm biased. Okay, you got to understand, I have bias. And here's my bias: is that this story is just a myth.
Yeah.
And so it is written by people who understand that. Well, maybe understand is the wrong word, but evil is being experienced despite the fact that no fruit was actually ever eaten. Like, this is just the human condition that we're going to experience this.
So your argument is just like, this is just the way they decided to tell this narrative of human existence.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so let's bring that back to what I said earlier, that about the connection between this story in particular, the book of Proverbs, and then the whole entire Old Testament in general, right? Especially the prophets. I think especially the prophets.
It's a broad brush you're pulling out there.
maybe prophets, Exodus, the entire Old Testament. How about that?
Why stop at just a few?
But I think, I don't know how I want to phrase this. I don't want it to sound like legalistic. Because I think this is applicable even if you don't believe in God. Well, hopefully you believe in goodness. Otherwise, I don't feel like being sarcastic about this. But when you are obedient to God, when you're obedient to goodness, truth, and beauty, then things go well for you. That's kind of what Proverbs puts out explicitly. It's like, hey, do good, good things happen to you.
It's a very black and white idea of this.
Proverbs is so black and white.
It's true.
No wonder conservatives love it so much.
It's hard to misinterpret because...
But, and then, so the story of Israel, which is shown in the Old Testament, is them living this out. It's a narrative of them occasionally being obedient to God, and good things happen. And occasionally they're disobedient, and they get sent into exile, and things are terrible for them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's the same thing here with this story of, hey, be obedient to God. Here's the key word. Trust him when he says don't eat the fruit. Why do you trust him? Because he knows what's best for you. He is a good father.
Yeah. And if you truly believe in his goodness, you believe in his righteousness. And the fact that what he's doing is the wisest and right thing.
Because, it almost seems arbitrary for him to put that. It doesn't seem arbitrary when you understand it to be myth. But, literally, when you... I'm sorry.
Well, so, the way that I've I want to ask you more about that too. And I know we're so short on time now, which sucks. But, so the way I've reasoned through it, my philosophical side of that coming out again, is I have it written down here. So for God, I said it in the negative. So for God to not create a way for us to disobey him would be for him to not create justice, or a way for him to not create fairness. What do you think about that?
I don't like it. And because it kind of goes against my argument I try to lay out in the Job talk, right? God doesn't need evil. God doesn't need.
And I agree with that.
God doesn't need to have something to correct in order to be just. Obviously, I mean, look at the world around you. There's a lot to be corrected. Mm-hmm. And that's the Christian faith, is that God is in the process of correcting it, right? And we are graced to be able to join God in that work of, creating a better society, a better world.
Yeah.
But God doesn't need something. I don't remember what words you use there, but he doesn't need anything negative to have justice, to do justice.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if putting my hand like that messes with my microphone. I'm still learning things here.
It's a path. So yeah, that was kind of. I'm still working through that idea too.
Please restate it again if you could.
Yeah. So the way I wrote it was, for God to not create a way for us to disobey him would be for him to not create justice.
Yeah, and so that's the free will argument for why they're suffering. That's Alvin Plantinga's argument is, of course there's suffering and evil because God thought it was a greater good for us to have free will and suffer than to. In this kind, I feel like we ourselves have been contradicting ourselves a lot in this episode.
It's probably true, and I think that's where it's like. It's very complex and it's difficult sometimes with all this. I know you're gonna laugh at that, and I refrained from it. I refrained, but I might not for long. Who knows? But I think that's the idea. And this is what we said in Job as well, in the Job episode, was that God does not. I'll even quote it this way from someone else. I'll paraphrase it, so it's not really a quote, but the idea is like. God doesn't task beings to do wrong. He doesn't tell them to do evil to the world or to us, because that goes against who he is. And so for God to task someone to cause great injustice and evil upon us is against him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, he doesn't do that, but there's a level where it seems that he allows that. It's like we saw that in Job, where it's like he didn't say go and kill his family and take everything away from him. He just said, no, go and see that I'm right. Basically, do whatever you want except for kill Job, and you'll see that I am omniscient and I am sovereign. And so it's interesting with that. So it's like there is a way where suffering isn't good. God doesn't like suffering, but it happens and he uses that. Not that he needs to use that.
He doesn't need to use it, but it's still a reality and he makes good of it.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to state the irony of what's going on here.
There's a lot. It's heavy.
Okay, so from a theological perspective, here's what's ironic to me, is it seems to me like the theological perspective I'm laying out is aligned with the philosophical
9.5, right?
Is aligned with your philosophy.
I love that you just used that.
And then your theological perspective is aligning with my philosophical take. And here's how, because the Garden of Eden seems to be this place of, predestination is not quite the word, but there seems to be a lack of free will. And there's a lack of knowledge as well. Oh man, that's a topic I could get into right there. Which is why I wouldn't.
Are we going to turn this into 3 hours? Because I would love to.
I could keep going because we
got through the first third. Man.
But all I'll say about free will is the reason I can't take a hard stance on us being beings of free will is because we don't have full knowledge. I don't think we can have free will without full knowledge. And I think it's God's intent for us to have full knowledge and therefore free will.
Can I ask again? Because I'm 10-minute warning. Because I want to ask, because I think this is kind of maybe the big thing that we're going back and forth on a little bit, is so define when you say full knowledge. What does that mean? And you probably answered this earlier, and I forgot because I'm dumb.
It's exactly the same kind of answer I was given earlier. It's knowledge. Knowledge without the semantics. It's all knowledge. It's experiential knowledge. It's because I think when we think of the person of God, especially Jesus, like Jesus is a very tangible example of this. Jesus, being the perfect human that he was, still had an experiential knowledge of evil, right?
You have to unpack that one a little for me.
Would you not say him being nailed to a cross was an experiential knowledge of badness?
I mean, he experienced other people's badness, but he never himself committed or experienced badness.
No. Well, okay, so maybe that's a different way. We haven't got to a sin episode yet, so of course we think about sin differently.
True.
But he still had, and so like, oh, that's interesting. I want to unpack that.
I know.
We don't have time. Because it's funny. The whole time I'm thinking about, they've eaten this fruit.
Yeah.
Sure. I don't. They had no reason not to eat the fruit. Okay. They had no knowledge. I don't think it's a good thing that they symbolically ate the fruit, but at the same time, like they had no good reason not to.
I don't care who you are listening. That was hilarious.
I was listening. I forget.
No matter which side you're on, that was funny.
There's not enough girl comedians yet that have gotten Netflix specials. I'm pretty sure there's only like one on Netflix. I watched it last night. I can't remember her name. Her dad was a pastor.
More than one, but
her dad was a pastor, which is hilarious. Well, or a very conservative Christian. I can't remember.
Okay.
But basically what she was saying was, I don't take any wisdom from my dad. He's never done anything wrong or tried anything. He doesn't know. I go up to him and say, hey, I feel like doing this. And he says, no, don't do that. And I say, why? And he says, Bible says not to. But my uncle on the other hand, has been in jail. So when he comes to me and he says, don't do that, and I say, why? He says, because I did it and I've been on a wheelchair ever since.
So it's funny. I kind of want to land on that a little bit.
It's very deep theologically.
Because it's true. And I think
that's what we're getting at here, though. Because,
yeah.
Her dad had this theological ivory tower knowledge, and her uncle had this world experience knowledge. He's experienced things.
And I think what I would argue, and it's funny because in real life it looks different sometimes, because I think I'm gonna say a lot of Christians would look at it and be like, oh yeah, cool, blah, don't disobey God, got it, done. And it's like, seems very, well, we won't use that for, look at anything else, like do not murder, got it, cool, done, whatever. But then
we can agree on that one. Yeah,
right. I'll just pick a very explicit one. But then when we listen to someone's testimony, we're more compelled by the guy who murdered a bunch of people and then found Jesus versus the guy who went to church every week and realized he needed Jesus. You know what I mean? And it's funny. It's like there's such a contradiction there in the way we approach things, where it's like we may think one way, but then we actually act a completely different way. And I would argue against both of those in a sense of like, you don't need to experience great evil to understand that it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that shows how powerful goodness is, how powerful God is. The fact that it's like, yeah, you don't need to, thank God we don't have to experience all these things to really understand how good he is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where I argue against that, the experiential knowledge of that. It's like, I don't think God intended for us to have that because we don't need that.
See, that's where it gets tricky, because when I talk about when I talk about experiential knowledge, I'm not talking about, going out and.
Well, so it's I'll play your defense card there, because the way even you explain Jesus' crucifixion.
Yeah, that's evil done to him just for existing.
You consider that experiential, which I would not.
Yeah.
So I think that's...
Yeah, so I'm not talking about going out and like murdering somebody. That's not the experiential knowledge I'm talking about. Like even with the story of Adam and Eve, like they eat the fruit and then they realize that they're naked.
Yeah.
What they didn't do their nakedness. That was done to them. And we could say God did that to them, right? That's how he created them. But they understood as soon as they ate the fruit, they had this awareness that they need to cover up. So I think when we talk about experiential knowledge, we've been understanding it differently. And what I want to say about experiential knowledge too, because I don't think we have to go out to murder somebody to understand it experientially.
I agree.
Because
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Wow, this is very interesting how we've gone this far with this conversation and realized how much we aren't communicating that much.
Different.
The definitions are very different the way we understand this. Because I think God has experiential knowledge of murder, even though he's never murdered and never been murdered. Well, Jesus has, so you know. But even before that, I think God had the experiential knowledge of what murder was. So, and that one's a hard one to. You can't really explain that, but like
it's tough. So I would say so would you define experiential? If you've had any experience, you'd say if you've had any experience with it, whether it's been done to you, you've done it yourself, or you've been involved with someone it's happened.
Yeah, so it really does seem like the difference between what we're talking about is.
5-minute warning.
we're gonna wrap this up. It's gonna be nice. It's gonna be a nice bow tie.
It's gonna be beautiful.
When I define experiential knowledge, I do think of the evil that has been done to us, and I think when you approach it, you think of the evil that we ourselves do.
I think of the one that we personally experience, we commit, is kind of the way I think of it.
Evils we commit is experiential.
Yeah. That's how I would define it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that category falls under the umbrella of my category, because anytime we ourselves commit egregious things, evils, just things that are not good for us, like it doesn't even have to be like it lessens our humanity more than it increases our humanity. Anytime we do something like that, that is also an evil against us. It's something we commit, but it's also done to us. Even though we're the ones doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So here we go, spending another episode talking about evil and suffering. You thought this was part 2 to Genesis. It's actually part 2 to evil and suffering / Job.
Which is also Genesis 3. Because, I mean, if we look at it, whether you believe it's real or not, it actually happened or not.
Hey,
it is kind
real.
Of like...
It is real.
I say this is kind of this is like the, if you will, Genesis of suffering.
Amen.
You know how bad I wanted to tee that one up.
It's a high tee.
Can't really mess with that one. But yeah, I think. Well, there's so much more I wanted to talk about too, but I'm glad we talked about this, because I think it shows a lot of, we could say, semantics, definitional differences that we have approaching this. But yeah, it's not a new concept. It's like we have Pandora, for example, the Greek myth, which kind of approaches the same idea. But yeah, overall, it's like there's a lot.
Yeah,
I think that's really where we came down to it. But it all comes back to this kind of struggle, one of the struggles of man, which is just this idea of what do we do with pain and suffering.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the foundationals.
Life is suffering.
Yeah.
Trey Hinkle, Buddha.
Underscore.
No, so all right. I think I only read through verse 5, but what we really we talked through verse 7, so we can pat ourselves on the back getting through verse 7.
Nice work.
I think we'll come back to Genesis 3 before we go further with Genesis.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot, because I want to get into like, the curse that God gave man, woman, and the serpent. Like, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about them being expelled from Eden. But so let me read 6 and 7 kind of to cap off this episode.
Yeah, great.
And then I also have a C.S. Lewis quote that kind of sums up what we've been talking about here.
Perfect.
We have time for that?
Yeah, it looks like we have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, great. Okay.
Well, I guess 4 minutes before we're like officially cut off. Probably like 1 minute before Annie gets mad.
Yeah, okay. I'm okay with her getting a little mad. So this is verse 6. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. Look how pretty my King James version is. I painted it myself.
That actually looks really cool.
Lifeway was like closing down. I got this for like $3.
No way.
It was a more feminine type, and I wanted to make it
a little more masculine.
A little more masculine. So
that's cool. I like that.
Thanks. So in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis writes this: we want to keep up at least our image of the image of God. We want to keep up the masquerade even within our own hearts. Remarkably, the phenomenon of self-deception testifies that we human beings, even when we do evil, are incorrigibly sold on goodness. At some level of our being, we know that goodness is as plausible and original as God. And that, in the history of the human race, goodness is older than sin. Which I hate that kind of goes back to what you were arguing against what I was arguing. But like, come on, just like lean into it for a minute. It's really romantic.
Oh, it's super romantic.
Goodness is older than sin. Of course it is, because God is before all things.
True. Yeah. So there's so much more that I want to talk about and we will talk about for sure. And I'm really excited for that. If anyone wants a little precursor, Isaiah 45:7, that's a big one for a lot of people. In the King James, I believe it uses the word evil. It talks about God brings peace and he also brings evil. Other verses say different things. But I know that's an argument for a lot of people. So it's like, that'd be a fun one to talk about. Just, again, going back to this idea of evil. But I think overall, I just threw a grenade in the thing that I...
You really did. You really did.
The great part is
like seeming at the...
I know. The great part is like, I disagree with that because it's not actually true. That word is a poor usage of that word. But a little teaser. But I think it's great. I think that what I love about that is we understand that the power of goodness. And I think that shows the power of who God is. And that's really what we need to come down to at the end of this when we look at theology or whatever, is understanding and recognizing how good is God, how powerful is God. And that's where we need to land.
Yeah, I have an answer too.
We have like 30 seconds.
How good is God? More good than you can imagine.
I'll cheers to that.
Cheers, mate. Let's close the tab.
Close it.
All right. Well, this was fun. This was a lot of fun. It was interesting.
It was. It's a new experience for us, and I know it's a little bit different for you guys. I appreciate you bearing in with us, and I'm really excited for us to continue this and kind of narrow out the tweaks and everything.
Yeah.
And thank you so much to Maximize Digital Media and Andy Lee for producing this episode. And we will catch you guys
on the next one.